Hello and welcome to Behind the Barcode, a Baptist World Aid Australia series that unpacks the truth about ultra-fast fashion and also how it impacts people and the planet. My name's Hannah, and having worked at a not-for-profit for almost 10 years, I'm now on a mission to be more mindful about what I buy.
And I'm Kat. I work to make the fashion industry more ethical, and I love bringing those insights into my everyday life and into my wardrobe. We are your hosts for this conversation. Ultra-fast fashion is reshaping how we wear, value, and buy our clothes. These cheap clothes really do come at a great cost. So, without further ado, let's get behind the barcode. Today we are talking about the human cost per wear of these items that we love to buy and not wear for very long from ultra-fast fashion businesses. Before we start talking about the specific issues that are related to the human impacts of ultra-fast fashion, many of the challenges are the same as majority of the fashion industry and certainly other fast fashion brands. So I wanted to just set the scene for us as to what those challenges really are. I was recently traveling for work and I bought myself a coffee and it was $8.70.
That is a crime.
It really hurt, but it was yummy.
Yeah.
And
you'd want to hope it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The things that went into it were these beans and the milk, right? And the beans were grown somewhere, shipped to Melbourne, roasted there, made into coffee by the barista that I saw do it. The milk was steamed by the same barista, put into my cup, and that was it. And that cost me $8.70. I can kind of see and feel the whole supply chain and all that went into it. Of course, there was transportation and harvesters and farmers. Like, it's not that simple as three things. But with the fashion industry, I'm not wearing balls of cotton like plant. You know, it is picked somewhere, it's spun into fabric, it's dyed somewhere else, it's turned into garments at a cut, make, trim facility somewhere else. And across the way, we lose that visibility. It's hard to have insight into the ethics that have been practiced at every stage.
Yeah. That's actually so true because there's so many cafes, well, not so many, but I've certainly been to some great cafes that have, a glass wall at the back and the little roastery machines for for coffee beans that are sort of, you can actually see the process in the background of, let's say Australians roasting the beans, and then that what comes out is ground by the barista, and then it's sort of made in front of you. It's very rare that you might see clothes made in front of you unless you go to a tailor nowadays, or you get it, actually tailored to you. But yes, that is very true. You can really see it. Whereas why does it feel so different for fashion?
Yeah, I think when we have bought something online and the product images were AI generated and it's the same as millions of others around the world, you can think that it's just kind of a robot that's made this, but it is still humans at every step. And I think I always need to remind myself of that, especially when we're looking at these ultra-fast brands that seem to have that human face so removed. So if we look at sort of the issues of the fashion industry overall, we have seen through the research in our ethical fashion report over the last 10 years, issues like paying a living wage. Now, a living wage is not a luxury. It's just something that meets your basic needs in life, putting food on the table, sending your kids to school, putting away a little bit for a rainy day. And we found that only 2% of companies in our research in 2024 were paying a living wage just at their final stage factories.
Thank you. My question was going to be, can you explain what a living wage is compared to, I don't know, whatever the wage is? But I guess you have explained it. It would be what a person might consider a good, like a quote-unquote good life, do you think? Or just a decent life. Right.
Yeah.
And also it would be dependent on the economy of the country, right, that they're in.
That's right.
Yeah.
We often struggle to conceptualise it in Australia because here a minimum wage is almost always set around or above what a living wage is. But in these countries, which we've spoken about before, sometimes attracting the business of international businesses is more beneficial than setting a minimum wage that will actually give your citizens the ability to live and provide for their families.
Right.
So those wages are not the same in a lot of producing countries. And when I share the stat that only 2% of companies that we assessed were able to reach that, it sounds like it's too hard or it's too lofty a goal, but we can't just hang up our hat and say it's too hard when it's not a luxury. Like it really is a necessity. And without that, people are so vulnerable to exploitation and modern slavery. They can't shop around for a better job if they're hand to mouth working in these places just to try and get enough to live.
That's a really good point. Right. So basically a lot of the countries reduce, or I don't know if reduce regulations, but they certainly are, they want to open that market up. They remove those regulations that perhaps other countries have, is what you're saying. You know, Australia has regulations about a minimum wage that no one can, should legally go under, whereas in some of these other countries it doesn't exist like that.
Yeah, there would be a minimum wage.
It's
just often not enough.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that would be the key thing. There's other places where they have something called an export processing zone where even more sort of rules don't apply so that they can attract businesses to work in those regions. Again, great on a global stage, great for a few in the country, but not great for all of those that work in that region.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Something else we were talking about as well is that and something that Alice Payne, our previous guest on the previous episode, and also what we have kind of popped up in the other conversations, is this idea that actually, it's not so much that the industry, like it employs people, lots of people really enjoy learning this livelihood. They might really, it is feeding their families, but it's about whether it's being paid at that living wage level, whether they're actually it's about justice, it's about being fair, right? So that's the sort of thing we're talking about.
Another issue, I guess, in the modern fashion industry is around supply chain tracing. It sounds so basic, but do you even know where the clothes that you're selling are being made? If you do you know where the fabric was being woven? And of course, if you don't know where these factories are, there's no way that you can check if there's modern slavery, child labour, excessive hours, discrimination against your female employees, all of these things. You can't even check because you don't even know.
Well, like on a label, you can see made in, Bangladesh or, made in China, but it's talking about the garment in full, right? And what you're talking about is the supply chains of all of the elements. Where are the buttons made? Where's, the zippers? They're probably not all from the same place either, right?
That's right. Yeah. And sometimes you might source through an agent. So you'll just tell the agent, I need 2 million white T-shirts. Or sometimes you'll go to a factory and they'll say, yes, we can totally take your business of these 2 million white T-shirts. But then you see that they've said that to a few other companies and they don't have the production quantity to handle that in-house.
Right.
So they've gone to their networks or they've gone to do something called subcontracting. And then you lose that visibility of what were the conditions of the subcontractor.
Right. Me, like the everyday consumer, how would I find that out if even some of the people who work for the brands or the companies also struggle to find that out? It's sort of just like you said, it's like an agent or someone else further down the line that would find that. We, as an organisation, got to watch a documentary a couple of years back, Fashion Reimagined, which was really interesting because it did follow a sort of a Western fashion designer who tried to make a brand or was on the journey to making a brand that was, or at least a sort of a capsule kind of season, completely and as ethically made as possible. And that was fascinating because I was able to witness, if anyone's watched it, I recommend it. It was really interesting how hard it is, actually so difficult, because a lot of the time they're still asking for mass, or like, if you're just needing a small volume of something, they, the factory doesn't know who made a particular thing or where the wool was spun, and even the way that they are dyeing the fabric, like the environmental impact. It's actually so much. So anyway, like one part of it is that human element for sure.
Just on that, doco, I think it was a great watch. We can put a link to the trailer in the show notes. I'm not sure where you can watch it now, but it was really interesting. And you saw that she was able to go on this journey because from the get-go she said, I'm going to make this a priority, that I have that visibility. And actually the top scoring brand in our research is a brand called Mighty Good Basics. And they have also kind of limited their size and their ability to grow so long as they can always maintain that visibility and that high standard of ethics. But when you have the reverse and you've grown really quickly, you've hit these huge, teams and numbers of employees, you've become accustomed to a certain level of profit and market share, and then you're working at that scale and saying, now let me try and figure out where the clothes are being produced. Let me try and turn the page a bit on how much workers are earning. It's really hard to retrofit.
It does sound really hard.
That doesn't mean that we need to give companies a free pass to not try, but that is where it is working quite slowly because they're not going to want to hand over those profits and all of those stores so that they can spend time actually figuring out how to treat people fairly along the way.
Yeah. So now we've been talking about people who, this is still a completely legitimate career path for a lot of people in the world, and it's great. It's bringing in income. What about for people who it wasn't a choice for them? Do we still have forms of, like forced labor or slavery in that way?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Actually, I sat down with Fuzz Kitto, who is the co-director of Be Slavery Free, and that's a coalition that Baptist World Aid is a part of, and he is a real expert and advocate in the space. So I might let him answer that question.
Great.
That's one of the big myths that we work with again and again. I talk to a lot of faith-based groups, Rotary clubs, governments. So we're working with it because there's more slaves in the world now than any other point of human history. What makes it modern slavery? And the Australian government in the legislation of the Australian Modern Slavery Act was the first government to actually define the term modern slavery. And people keep saying, what's modern about it? Well, the economic system, global economic system we're now in, makes it modern. And that's where it's made it different. In the past, it's been around for thousands upon thousands of years, of course. But, we're doing this because it is the second largest illegal trade in the world, second only to the drug trade, just above fraudulent with all the scam centres going on at the moment. But, so it sits there, and that's why we're doing it, because we want to stop it and because we believe that so many human beings are just affected by this. Our guesstimation, along with our great partners, the Mekong Club based in Hong Kong, we estimate 30,000 new people every single day. New people are being caught in slavery. Together with NGOs, faith-based groups and governments, we're able to get out probably 185 a day. So 30,000 in, 185 out. The ledger is just not matched. And that's why we see this is so imperative to help, because everybody has a role that they can play in doing away with modern slavery.
Those numbers are insane.
Yeah.
30,000 new people a day.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're looking at about 50 million people in modern slavery in different forms around the world today. And as Fuzz said, it's modern. It's not what you think of. It's not, being shipped off to a plantation or these really traditional pictures that you have. And yet people are being trafficked across borders to work in fashion factories. They're having their papers confiscated. And of course, there's more insidious and abusive forms as well.
It's so awful. Are there parts of the supply chain that have higher volumes of forced labour?
Certainly those places that are further removed from the visibility of the company and where they might conduct social audits, that's where there's particular vulnerability. So in that raw materials stage, cotton growing is a key concern, but it is happening right across the supply chain as well.
That's quite similar, isn't it, also to, and I think this is, again, it's a supply chain issue across a couple of industries, right? So cocoa, coffee, similar things. I think
Certainly
it's at the
seafood.
picking, seafood.
Yeah.
It's at the the obtaining of that raw material, I guess, that is way less visible. You're right. Interesting.
What we're seeing, if we turn the conversation to ultra-fast fashion, as I'm sure listeners would have heard by now, ultra-fast fashion just kind of put their foot on the accelerator. All these good and bad things of the fashion industry. So much choice and accessibility for the consumer, but incredible demands, pace of production, low prices, cutting corners, and really it puts these issues in a magnifying glass. And when you kind of overlay that business model on these issues, you see they're all happening in these supply chains, and also some particular vulnerabilities and complexities come out as well.
Okay, great. Well, let's talk about some of the sources of those vulnerabilities just after this break.
In this podcast, we've been talking about injustice in the fashion industry, but that's not the only place we see this problem. For 700 million people around the world living in extreme poverty, injustice is felt in the small things. Who gets to eat, be paid fairly for work, drink clean water, go to school, sleep somewhere warm tonight? It's not right that so many people, through no fault of their own, can't access the small yet vital things in life. But together, we can change that. Baptist World Aid is an aid and development organization. Since 2013, we've been working towards creating a fairer fashion industry, one that's better for people and better for the planet. And for over 60 years, we've also been connecting generous Australians with local Christian partners who work alongside children, women, and men, helping them fight injustice and build long-term solutions to poverty. We help communities prepare for disasters like floods or earthquakes, and we help our local partners provide emergency aid when disasters strike. Together with our partners and local communities, we dream of a world where poverty has ended and all people enjoy the fullness of life God intends. To learn more about our work and how you can get involved, visit baptistworldaid.org.au, also linked in the show notes.
Okay, and we are back talking about the reasons why some people around the world are more vulnerable than others. Can you unpack a couple of them, especially in the fashion industry?
Yeah, so we've talked about living wages, and a key part of that is that you can earn what you need to in reasonable hours. And something that's really prevalent in ultra-fast fashion production is that because they're getting these really small test run orders and then they'll be asked to do a lot more, is being paid by a piece rate. That means paid per piece that you make. And workers aren't likely to be on the books all year round and have access to annual leave or sick leave. They're often contracted in just to make that particular thing, or they'll walk around something known as Sheen Village, where all of these little producers are working for these ultra-fast fashion brands, and they'll say, okay, I can make a pair of jeans for the next few weeks, and they'll sort of sign up to work there.
Right, so contractors, I guess.
Yeah.
But just a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the possible wages are advertised and it looks pretty good, but really it's advertised based on an impossible rate of production.
Really?
So these workers are working incredibly long hours to bring home close to what they were promised, to produce these things.
But based off something that's not possible. So they might say, your rate per day would be this much for it, but what's in the subtext is for 100 pairs of jeans, and they might only be able to make 50 or 70.
That's right.
So either they work until they make that 100 or they just don't. And they leave to go home with less. Okay.
Yeah, if they're able to leave until they've made what they need to.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Which again is sort of exploitation in that way. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And of course, there's injustice there in that expectation, that kind of coercive behaviour of management and the really low wages that they're receiving. Mm-hmm. But on top of that as well, I feel sad for a worker's ability to take pride in their work that they've done carefully. These are skilled practitioners at what they do, but being forced to rush through everything you make as your entire job.
Yeah.
Consumers will complain about the quality of these products, and in general we would say that maybe the quality of the fashion items that we're buying has declined recently. And I think that's matched with the way that these workers are getting paid and the time pressure that they're being put under. Of course, not every seam is going to be straight, they can't keep up with that.
Yeah, corners will be cut.
Yeah.
That's very true. Are there any other contributing reasons? That's a good point. I really didn't know about that.
So a particular vulnerability that arises and human rights concern when companies are producing in China or when they have limited visibility beyond that final stage of production is an issue called Uyghur forced labor. Uyghur Muslims are a marginalized minority in China, and they're really horrifically treated by the government there. And it's this form of state-sponsored forced labor really beating down this people group. They are from the region that they would call East Turkestan, or is more widely known as Xinjiang, which is also a region that produces really fine, good quality cotton and a lot of the world's cotton. So if you don't know where your cotton is coming from, there's a very high chance it's coming from this region that's so heavily tied to forced labour.
Wow.
Fuzz Kitto actually told us about it, so I might just cut to him to hear what he had to say.
Is that they've taken them, they take them off the streets, they put them into concentration camps, probably the term that people know most. Up to 1 million people, over 1 million people have had that happen in the last 10 years. They try to re-educate them. They are taught and will only be able to use Chinese, Mandarin. They are then forced into working in factories, on farms, and even on fishing boats, seafood processing, etc. But a lot of the factories that have been making clothes have been based there in East Turkestan, Xinjiang, but also the cotton. They produce something like 23% of the world's cotton, 18 to 23% of the world's cotton. It's a very fine cotton. It's a long strand cotton, like as in Egypt. There are only 2 countries that do the long strand cotton. And so there have been so many people in forced labour.
State-sponsored.
Yeah.
Systemic.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's so horrific that this is happening, and it's maybe not that widely known out of maybe the fashion industry or those concerned with business ethics and human rights. The Chinese have really controlled media, and so the ability for this important story to be told is limited. And it's really concerning when you hear, as Fuzz said, that like 1/5 of all of our cotton comes from this region. Another key supply chain of risk there is tomatoes as well. Actually, they grow a lot of the world's tomatoes, and the polysilicon used in solar panels, which is really fraught, I guess, to hope for a sustainable product and expose yourself to risk of forced labour in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show just how many industries we don't have visibility over either. 2 questions for you that I've just sort of sprung to mind. One of them is, obviously, this is a beautiful long strand cotton, which Fuzz was just talking about. I'm going to assume that this predates ultra-fast fashion, but what makes it even more, ultra-fast fashion a different player in this game? Like how has this exacerbated it?
Look, to be honest, ultra-fast fashion isn't using very much cotton. It's primarily polyester.
Sure.
And that's what we'll hear about in our future environmental sort of impact episode. But Fuzz also mentioned that Uyghur Muslims are being shipped around the country to work at factories in the name of, becoming a good citizen of the country or re-education. But it is just forced labour. And we are really encouraging the companies that we assess to do their due diligence on where things are made and just ensure that you stay as far away from that risk in that region as possible. And with a supply chain that's so big and so cheap and kind of unregulated as these ultra-fast fashion companies, they're really not doing that due diligence.
Right. And the second question I had was how you mentioned that, some of these companies aren't doing the due diligence, but how can I as a consumer, how might I figure out where my the cotton's coming from in the clothes that I want to buy?
There are some certifications that you can look for. So Cotton Australia will have a logo on their partner products, and that cotton has been grown in Australia then. There's a few sort of new innovative fibres that are coming up. One is called Good Earth Cotton, and they have technology right in the cotton plant that means that throughout the product's whole life it's traceable. Cool. So even if it gets thrown in the mix at a fabric mill with other cotton, you can tell whether it has been grown in that region. So there's some interesting things coming out, but I would say ultimately as a consumer, it shouldn't be your responsibility. Really, in a case like that, we need the government to step up.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that is really interesting. So when it comes to ultra fast fashion being, and is exacerbator a word? Contributing or exacerbating the issue? Yeah. What's another vulnerability that's that has come from that?
Really, we're seeing that companies are starting to realize and should realize that their practices and the way that they've set up actually influences their suppliers' ability to perform ethically. And that means setting reasonable expectations for how quickly you can turn something around. What is a reasonable cost negotiation here? How quickly am I going to pay you for what you've made? And another thing is looking at your supplier base and thinking about how you can increase leverage. If I have one factory and I am a big share of what they produce, then if I ask them, you need to clean up your act in this area, they're going to listen to me more likely. But with the case of these ultra fast fashion producers, they have networks of thousands of suppliers. So they actually are not reaching that leverage, and they've spread themselves so thin that they are not doing those basic things like auditing.
Checks, audits.
Yeah. And really looking for the concerns in those factories. They probably aren't, they don't really want to either. They're just kind of resting on not having that question or expectation asked.
That's such an interesting difference between fast fashion and ultra fast fashion yet again. It's like fast fashion, they would be really wanting lots of volume from a couple of big factories. But then, that is a completely different business model of just saying, we want one thing only from one factory and we're only a micro percentage of it. That's really interesting.
That's right. And like when I'm conducting the research for the ethical fashion report, I always look at that number of suppliers. And I know that for an ethical sourcing manager, it's a lot of work to make sure that your factories are doing the right things and to keep an eye on them, to engage with them responsibly and organise things like audits. And I think that's quite a lot of work that you've made for yourself if you have 100 suppliers or 200 suppliers, let alone up to 7,000 maybe, which is the magnitude that we're talking about in the case of these businesses. Actually, in that conversation with Fuzz, Kitto, and just a reminder, if you would like to hear the whole thing, you can access it in the link in our show notes. I asked Fuzz, well, is it possible for these businesses to change their ways in order to treat workers more fairly? And his answer surprised me a little bit. So I'm going to play it for us now.
Please play it.
Is it possible for them? It's possible for every company to do this. It means that the prices will go up, but that's the fallacy again. To pay a living income or a living wage to a worker, the amount that they actually get would not be a major increase to the cost of consumers buying those garments. Everybody thinks, oh my gosh, they assume because in the West generally 40% of a budget will be on wages. In these places, it's around about 5 to 7%. So the amount of percentage increase for 5 to 7% of your supply chain would not be a massive cost for the consumers to be having to pay the extra for. And so can they do it? Yes, they can do it. Never underestimate the ingenuity for the innovation and the creativity of human beings. Put it together in a company and you get corporate minds working together. And just as much they can sort of go, okay, what's the bottom line on the profits that we can make? The same way they can add it and say, what's called double materiality. In other words, we can be interested in the profits and we can be interested in caring for the people that are involved in making it as well. Yes, they can. The thing is whether they choose to do that. And that's always the big question with human beings about what we choose to do.
It's pretty unbelievable to hear the idea that it wouldn't cost us a huge amount more. That's wow.
Yeah, I think we fear that it could really change the price tag. But I will put my hand up and say I would be very happy to pay, 50 cents, $1 more if it meant that a living wage was being met. But even just hearing from him that Of course they can change. We have incredibly innovative, bright thinkers leading businesses that are incredibly successful. They just need to turn their efforts to actually success in treating their workers fairly. But will they do that? Not sure.
And also, who holds the responsibility to make those changes? Right. Yeah.
And that's really why we are encouraging people to speak out to their MP when companies of their own volition are not going to take the steps needed to protect workers. We need our governments to step in and set that that minimum requirement for what we'll accept of the products that we bring into this country, that we sell in our markets. And it's so crucial that we communicate. We won't stand for forced labour. We won't stand for environmental degradation. And really, legislation is that key place that we can do that.
That's cool. And also not to be afraid, right, to perhaps contact a brand, your favourite brand, if you find that they've done something really low. Just go ahead and contact us or something. Hopefully they look at them.
Or use our Speak Out to Brand tool on our website.
Yes.
Yeah, we've seen it work for other brands in the past.
Yes, because they must and should be moved by consumer, driven thing. I guess the question is, hopefully our little contributions are little enough drops in the sea compared to the people who are still buying things. But I do think that we still need to be able to let our voices, act in this way.
Totally.
Yeah, because there's actual humans on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why your choice, whether or not to shop with a company, is always strengthened by your voice alongside it to the brand itself, either to say, I shopped with you because I love your ethics and your transparency, or I didn't because I didn't love what I saw.
Yes.
And the same is true with our government, using our voice to our government so that they're putting in the legislation that will protect vulnerable people.
Yep. And you know what? That's actually so true as well. Oftentimes we might only think about contacting a place directly for a complaint, but actually tell them that they're doing good if they're doing well. It means that also that you're speaking up for the consumers who still purchase from them and that you love what the decisions and the things that they're doing. And what about government responsibility? I mean, Fuzz did mention that. We've talked a bit about the Speak Out to MPs tool. Is there anything further about that?
Yeah, well, I'll let him say it and then we can sort of weigh in on that too.
So the government has a role in protecting. Now, a government and the legislation, the laws they have, laws are always an expression of the values of that country or that culture. And so it's matching up your values with your legislation. And we think that a forced labour ban coming into Australia, the US has it, and because of the North America Trade Agreement, and Canada and Mexico have it, Japan has it, the EU has it, South Korea has just had a piece of legislation proposed in the Parliament last month. The UK is looking at it. And when we've got that sort of block happening, say, no, you can't go into those countries if you've got forced labour there. And what the US have done, probably some of the best piece of legislation we've seen, is what they do is that they slap on a withhold and release order, the WRO, withheld and release order, so that if goods are coming into the country from areas where reports and media, etc., have shown that there is lots of forced labour, they apply what's called rebuttable presumption. Rebuttable presumptions mean we presume that there's slavery there, and you've got to rebut it and show that there's not. And so what happens then? They've got to prove that there's not slavery. We think that's so important. Why do you think it's important? Because Australia doesn't have that. It means that we're becoming the dumping ground of forced labour goods, fashions, etc., coming into Australia. And the government has a role to actually say, no, that's wrong. It's not our values. It's not Australian values.
Those levers that the government has to pull are much more impactful than the ones that I can as a consumer.
Right.
And I think all things need to sort of work in conjunction. Later in our conversation, Fuzz says systemic problems need systemic solutions. If the problem is a little bit of consumers, a little bit of industry, a little bit of government, then everyone needs to chip in to change the narrative. And I think what he said there about the forced labour ban is something that's so central to wrap your head around. Our global neighbours, especially wealthier Western markets, a lot of them are starting to put in legislation that makes it harder to import products that are made with forced labour. And when Australia doesn't have that, these companies are just turning their attention to where it's easier to sell their products. They're not cleaning up their act yet. So we need to move as one with our global neighbours and set this legislation as well, so that, as Fuzz said, we don't become the dumping ground for it. We actually saw that the US changed a bit of their legislation recently, and then the next quarter, advertising data came out from Shein and Temu, and they spent way more in Australia. So straight away they went, it got slightly harder there, I'm going to start selling here. And we need to communicate that that's not okay.
Why does that feel terrifying? That they're just like, who's the next, that's totally
terrifying. Makes sense from their perspective.
Our market is, a bit more available.
That's right.
Wow.
So we heard from Fuzz that our legislation reflects our values, and we know that our purchasing also reflects our values. And an author and leader in this space called Diane Osgood wrote a book about your consumer superpowers. And she really said that when you do shop in line with your values, that sense of reward you get is so clear and meaningful. It might be different to the dopamine hit that you feel when you've purchased something cheap and on a whim, but that is really meaningful, and there is such value in that alignment with what you say you care about and then what you do in practice.
I feel that. I really feel that. I'm looking forward to breaking this down a bit more in our consumer psychology one. But that's very true. Even if every time I take my reusable cup to a cafe, I'm like, this feels great because I'm not contributing, and then I feel the opposite if I've left it at home. But it is a feeling that you can feel, like you're really also making a difference in a tiny way. That's great. Cool. Diane Osgood.
Yeah, check her out.
Thanks for the reco. One of the things I might start doing is really reflecting on where my clothes are made before I start purchasing, which I don't know if I've done a huge amount of work ever doing. Like, I don't know, would I just go to the about page on a brand's, thing, and hopefully they've got something about supply chains. I have noticed that a lot more brands do that. But I'm also conscious of like greenwashing a little bit, this version of it. Do you think that there is an increase in companies who are publishing some of their supply chain stuff?
Yeah, totally. Yep. Actually,
have you seen a change through the ethical fashion report stuff?
Yeah, that's one of the big changes that we've seen in the last 10 years of the ethical fashion report, that a lot more companies are choosing to publish that information. And so now when I'm meeting with companies about what they can improve on, I'm able to say, you're in the minority in your view that it's commercially sensitive and you're too nervous to publish it.
Yeah, cool.
It's important for accountability. It's important for concerned consumers, for trade unions and industry activism to play their part to see which brands are associated with factories that might have these kind of dangers or abuses occurring in them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that. I guess, we've talked a little bit about how a lot of these vulnerabilities, the human cost of fashion supply chains, it isn't alone in fashion, and it hasn't just started from ultra-fast fashion, right? It's been happening for hundreds of years, really, if you look back, even Industrial Revolution style. But ultimately, ultra-fast fashion does magnify and it probably increases it dials it up. So it does, dial up those existing labour abuses. So they're not new problems, but we might have some new solutions, right? Or that gives me hope, or that we might have some new options to us.
That's a great way to put it, Hannah. And I'm really excited and hopeful about what could happen if the listeners of this podcast and Australians more generally chose to call on our government to protect vulnerable workers around the world.
You've been listening to a Baptist World Aid Australia podcast. We know some brands won't change unless the rules of the game change. You can help create a just fashion system by using our tool to write to your MP, urging them to support industry-wide legislation that will mean fair treatment for workers and better protections for the environment. Check out our ethical fashion guide linked in our show notes to see how fashion brands measure up. Baptist World Aid Australia is a not-for-profit Christian organisation working with communities towards a world without poverty. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're on, and we pay our respects to elders past and